Say thanks to everyone for showing up today.
Got it.
We are at controlled unclassified information, process and policy. So I am going to turn it over to Rich. And Rich, I am going to have you introduce yourself first
Great.
of all.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rich Wright. I'm the Director of Secure and Global Research. We're a division of the Vice President for Research. Most of you will know me because I'm the dope that reaches out for anything that involves export controls. I'm also do international engagement. And in this role, I serve as CSU's Facility Security Officer, which is the role that basically holds our security classification from the Department of Defense. Right now, CSU currently holds a secret level clearance with the Department of Defense. I'm bringing that up because that can be confusing at times because even though we have a secret level clearance, CUI and classification are two entirely different things. Next slide, please.
Rich, before you go on, and only
yes.
because I've gotten to be in a presentation with you previously, can you tell people about what you did formerly in your former life?
Yes, thank you. So prior to coming to CSU, I was actually hired in 2019 as a contractor to run the CUI program, but I was only on that for about a week before my mandate changed. Prior to that, I ran Wright Computer Solutions, which was where I did penetration testing, and I was for a while Fort Collins only ethical hacker. So from 2006 to 2017, I worked as a network security specialist and as an ethical hacker. So
I think that context is great.
Yeah, well, I like to say that I was paid for years to attack systems, and now I'm paid to prevent people from getting into our systems. So, most people, white hat was a really good name for a while, but I think ethical is much more appropriate. So, the reason we're talking to you, and none of this is new to anybody here. We have an almost $500 million research enterprise. With that enterprise comes federal safeguarding. We have information that we cannot share with just anybody on campus. That doesn't mean it can't be shared, but it does mean we have to be aware of who we're sharing that with, where it's stored, and how we control access to that, even with folks who are able to access that information. This can be anything from personal contact information, obviously, to research data. This does not, at this point, apply to FERPA and HIPAA. We'll get into that. But this is basically the information we required in order to run our successful research enterprise. And now with these new federal regulations concerning CUI, frankly, it's confusing and many times conflicting. So the point of this presentation is to give a top-down approach of what CUI is, how we're managing it at CSU, and where you need to go to get your CUI questions answered. So we're going to cover this again from a very top-down approach. Everybody on the call who's had CUI has had individual safeguarding requirements. Those are going to require working with me, working with Research IT, working with sponsored programs to make sure that your individual project has proper safeguarding. We're not going to go into all of the different clauses, all of the different FAR and DFARS clauses you might find in contracts, partially because I won't remember them and neither will you. And secondly, we will deal with those when they arise in your contracts. However, what we're going to do in this presentation is we're going to explain what CUI is, our best abilities to identify CUI, and what we currently have at CSU. So this is the most important thing of the entire presentation. CUI is a method of control. It is not a method of classification. We can right now at CSU handle any materials up to the secret level, which means we can handle classified information, we can handle secret level information. We're not authorized to handle top secret or top secret SCI. But anything below that designation, CSU can handle. Controlled unclassified information is a method of safeguarding information. It's not a classification in itself. And that is where we get confused a lot of times, because what we need to do with CUI is identify it and then manage it. It is not a matter of determining who can see it. If you had brought me classified information, I would have a whole different set of safeguards we would need to put in place depending on the agency. Those would be foreign national requirements. Those would be advanced safeguarding requirements for your lab. And we would have to attest, possibly even sign an NDA if you were going to be managing this type of information. And usually that's going to be dual use. There's going to be a military use with that. CUI is basically was designed to replace all of the legacy markings that are below the classified level. So some of you may have heard of law enforcement but sensitive but unclassified, for official use only. There were about 4 or 5 other designations that all went away in 2012 and fell under this banner of controlled unclassified information. So again, and I will say this through the entire presentation, it's a control classification, it's a control marking, not a classification marking. And that is very important for us to remember as we go through the presentation. So as I mentioned, CUI was designed to be an all-in-one for all of these different agencies. The reason, of course, is the feds don't talk to each other any better than the rest of us do in any government enterprise. So you would have the Department of Energy may have something labeled for you. You might have the Department of Defense labeled something law enforcement sensitive. Neither agency knew what the classifications were, and every federal document needs to be marked. So if I receive data from the federal government that is law enforcement sensitive, I have to follow those safeguarding requirements interdepartmentally. So for the feds, they look at this going, I'm tired of all these different classifications. Basically, it's everything below the classified level. And so that's what CUI is this whole amalgamation of different federal classifications that don't reach the classified level. Now, this was never designed to really impact anybody because the majority of folks who receive this information are already in a cleared environment. I had a meeting 2 days ago with all the facility security officers in Northern Colorado, and we're the only one that's from education. Everybody else was from industry. So we had Ball there, we had Numerica there, we had Khaki there, we had Blue Mountain there, different defense contractors who, as soon as you walk into that building, you're in a secure environment. So CUI really doesn't apply to them because their entire environment is secure. University, as we all know, is the exact opposite of a secure environment. CUI was never designed to be put onto an open network, but a university has an open network. A university has open communications, and people can request information on other people's projects. It's a very different environment than a cleared contractor environment, which is why universities are scrambling to manage CUI, where if you talk to your commercial contractors, and any of you that have pass-through contracts through government contractors may wonder why we're paying so much attention to this. You know, we had some folks from Lockheed who were like, why are you making such a big deal about this? Well, it's because I've got 44,000 people on campus that could potentially access this data at any time on a shared network. We don't have a zipper line. We can't separate it from the rest of campus. So that is why we have a unique, I would say, problem is how I would put it, managing CUI on our campus. We do have a SCIF, a Secure Compartment Information Facility on campus. That's a federally designated area. It's on Johnson 309, which I manage. That is an area where you can hold classified conversations. You can manage contracts and conversations at the classification of the classified or below. If you ever needed to have a secure meeting, that's the location you would have it in. However, CUI doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have it behind closed doors. You just have to make sure that the wrong people's ears can't hear it. I told you this was going to be top down. So again, it is not a classification. Nothing is referred to as classified as CUI. It is simply a control that we use to safeguard unclassified information. So we have to remember those pieces. These don't require advanced safeguarding. They require safeguarding as mandated by the feds. And right now, CSU has an open networked environment. There's no way we can come in line with federal requirements for data security when you're in an open environment, which is why we've had to take additional steps. So I promised I wouldn't give you too much. These are the things, this is the reason why we're all dealing with this. Executive Order 13556 was an Obama era order from 2012. This was when we were all required to dump the existing classifications and move to a CUI classification. Nobody did anything in 2012. Nobody did anything in 2013, and nobody did anything in 2014. Everybody kind of sat around and waited for the CUI registry to be created at the end of 2014, 2015, which gives us resources for managing, marking, and handling controlled unclassified information. At that same point, NIST 800-171, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, those are essentially the rule book I follow as FSU, as Facility Security Officer at CSU, maintaining our security clearance for safeguarding. So this is when you hear about me putting controls in your office. If you've ever had me show up and say you need to turn your monitor away from the doors so it can't be viewed from the outside, or if I say I want you to lock your hard drive in an additional cabinet, all of the pedantic things that I do in your office that seem silly are all part of the NIST 800-171, which are federal security controls that for controlled unclassified information. We have many, many other regulations. I'm not going to bother you or bore you with most of those. However, if you have questions about those, I would ask that you would come to me and we can help you disseminate those. Next slide, please. There's a few more we'll just cover. FAR 52-204-21. This is safeguarding of covered contractor systems. This is managing your endpoints, making sure that there's antivirus on all machines, making sure that you don't have administrative access if you are a user. Making sure that your environment is secure. Those are all part of FAR 52-204-21. The disclosure of information, DFARS 204-7000. This is one that we see in a lot of contracts. Again, this is the disclosure of information. And I brought this in here because this is set by your program manager. We cannot push back on these clauses once we've signed these contracts. So if you do have publication concerns, if you don't know, if you don't understand all of these clauses, you need to make sure that either sponsor programs, SGR, research IT, whoever you're working with, that you understand and you can follow those rules and regulations. Publication restrictions, as you know, are one of the big bugaboos. You know, the feds don't always want you to publish, and they don't always tell you that they don't want you to publish. So it's important that you know your rights if you're signing on to these contracts. And then 32-2002, again, part of the National Archive. And I would encourage anybody to go to it if they want to read more about the code and code regulations. So when you're identifying CUI, again, it's only federally funded research. So controlled unclassified information has to come from the feds. It will be considered controlled unclassified information if it's a condition of the federal award, and the federal sponsor is responsible for determining CUI. We cannot associate or classify after the fact. Only the original classifier can make the classification. The CUI could be research data, it could be project information, it could be emails, it could be conversation, it is communication in whichever form that may take. The CUI safeguarding for CUI safeguarding at CSU is only required on our projects and our systems. So if you are at a conference that CUI is at this conference, it's not your responsibility. You can go in and attend a meeting if you have a need to know. CUI is not a classification. It's not like secret level or classified level where you need additional backgrounds or you need other steps in order to attend that conference or to attend that meeting. If CUI is present and the person that owns that CUI thinks you have a need to know, you can attend. It is a lower classification. And the person that's going to make that designation is the person that manages the CUI. So whoever is in charge of that is the one who's in charge of the need to know. And again, this can only be managed and marked by the feds. There are no other options. We had a situation last week where I had a PI on the phone told, oh, by the way, this is CUI. It wasn't CUI. You cannot tell me on midway through a phone call, this is CUI. I don't know what the classifications are. I don't know what the original derivative classification was. None of that is applicable. So you can't just be dumped. You can't be told midway through, oh, by the way, you have CUI. Now they're going to try to do that because the other flip side of CUI is that program managers are not used to dealing with us. They're used to dealing with cleared contractors who don't have to worry about their systems being compliant. We don't have that luxury. But at the same point, we're not going to be their dumping ground, and we're not going to let them just say, okay, you figure it out. That was kind of our approach in the past. When CUI was first established at CSU, it bounced around between different programs. It wasn't managed properly. And a lot of you who have heard from us, especially from Candace Ramsey at Research IT, you're going to see that we were scrambling to fix the situation. We had CUI on campus that we didn't recognize or label properly, and we had to manage it. That is not going to be the case anymore. I am not anticipating we're going to find CUI on campus anymore. We're going to see contracts come in that have CUI provisions in them, and we can manage those from the front end. But there should be no scenarios where we're midway through a contract and we said, oh, by the way, in 2021, we neglected to see these clauses. We've been pretty diligent at looking at all of these contracts. We've been audited several times, which forced our hands on this, and we're very confident that we know what CUI we currently have on campus. That was one of our biggest hurdles. Now that we've established that, we can move forward and we have a lot more leverage with these program managers. And if you are not comfortable with the terms of the contract, we need to be free to push back on that. Next slide, please.
Rich, before we go through, I have a clarifying question for you.
Yes.
And it's also going to address the fact that both Chris and Bill have put into the chat defining what FAR is and DFAR is. So FAR is our governing regulations that we have over contracts, and DFARs are the defense portion of FARs for governing defense contracts. But my question is that CUI isn't only on contracts, is it? Could it also come through on a grant or a cooperative agreement potentially?
It could, yes, thank you. Yes, it very well could. However, as you know, the cooperative agreements are handled in many times very differently than contracts.
Yes.
We can't have a cooperative agreement that says there's CUI unless CUI is in the agreement. Most cooperative agreements don't follow the same. And I appreciate you bringing up. FAR is Federal Acquisition Regulations. DFARS is Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations. Clauses put into federal contracts for any time that we're receiving either data, materials, stuff that goes in the projects. The FAR and DFARS clauses will jump into that effect. A cooperative agreement many times is just an annual renewal of an existing project. And for an example, at SEML, for this Center for Environmental Management of Military Lands, we have many cooperative agreements where we have folks that are doing restoration work or archaeological work, natural resources assessments on military bases. So these agreements are renewed annually. What cannot happen is somebody dumping in a clause in that contract without the original classification. So the person that originally created the agreement is the individual that needs to put CUI clauses in that agreement or in that project contract. So yes, to your point, anything that we receive federally could have CUI mandated safeguarding controls. And again, those are for storing, managing, transmitting, and accessing the data. It is not the classification of the data itself. Thank you.
Yeah, and we have some new people who are joining our sessions. And so just as a clarifying point, when we have grants and cooperative agreements, usually the overarching federal regulations are going to come from uniform guidance, whereas on a contract, we're going to be looking at the FARs for acquisition. But there is another question about whether or not you said they're generally coming from federal governments, but do we ever see these as flow through from another entity like a university or a private company coming to us as well?
Yes, thank you for bringing that. We see those that flows through quite a bit, but it has to be our handling has to come from the original classification. So, for example, University of Michigan would not be able to create a project with CUI. They're not a federal entity. They would have to be the secondary from a federal sponsor. but we can receive CUI provisions and flow through contracts. And this would be an example of one where I would work with you individually. I have one currently that we're working on right now, where we are the third person in the chain, for lack of a better word. This person is receiving CUI bannered email and CUI bannered materials. I'm acting as the receiver for those materials, and I'm hand couriering those to the individual so we can remain compliant on our end, because all he needs from this project is to be able to read this document. And so with that ability, we were still managing our CUI on campus. We were able to follow the provisions through the flow through, but there was no additional safeguarding because it never hit our network. And I will explain that piece in a little bit.
Great, thank you. And there's some more just clarifying from both Bill and Chris in there.
Bill, so Bill Mosley and Christy Charney know more about this than I do. So they will, if they contradict me, go with them, not me. And Adam, if he's on the call too. So
and there's another question just came up. Sorry, before we get started again, is do non-federal organizations, so state, municipal, private, have control markings?
No. Oh, well, that's not true. They may have a state organization will have state markings, sure. They won't be federal. Lockheed Martin will have their own classification of for your eyes only. But what we're talking about are only contracts that come from the federal government.
And a question for later that's formulating in my head is, what happens when we have a subcontract underneath us? Or a sub-awardee underneath us? You might be covering that later, but I'm just that all of this has, that.
I would hope we'd run out of time before I had to address that, but I doubt that. But yeah, that is one of our big challenges, and we will cover that. Yeah.
Great.
So please, I'm not seeing the chat questions come up. So, if you see any relevant questions, please stop me and we'll move forward. The feds define CUI as two different types of CUI. CUI basic is what we have at CSU. It's defined explicitly in the contract with either a FAR or a DFARS clause. The rules for marking there are rules for marking documents and email within the contract. That would be one of the dissemination controls. And again, we're not going to go over the numbers, but if you're looking at a 712 control, then they're going to require bannered email. Controlled environments. I'm very, very big about this. I come across as having a tinfoil hat most of the time when I'm doing this. You need to control your lab. You need to make sure your blinds are closed on your door if you have a glass in your door. You can't have anybody from the outside being able to see in. You can't access CUI from a shared environment. You have to do your very best to put in physical safeguarding anytime you're accessing CUI. And that is a really big piece for the feds. It's not just our data systems, our data centers, but they want to know what technology control plans, which we will cover, I'm putting in place to protect your lab. Access and sharing. Again, this is not a classification. If you have a colleague that has a need to know, you can share that information with them in a controlled environment. Your only real concerns would be is if there were national identity clauses put into the contract from the federal sponsor. An example would be Department of Energy has foreign national requirements on the contract. Those foreign national requirements will flow through all periods of the contract. So if you're sharing, you may need to consider whether or not the person you're sharing it with is a US citizen or a foreign national. Beyond that, and again, those are coming from the feds. You are the PI. You're the one working on this project. You're the one that gets to decide who you can share this information with. And I keep saying this isn't a classification. It's simply a control. You can make that decision. Incident reporting. This is where Research IT has been doing a phenomenal job. When you think you've made a mistake, come to Secure and Global Research, come to Research IT, tell us your concern. We will address it before we get dinged. Our auditors would much rather hear that I found stuff and addressed it than them finding it. So if you see something, if you have a question, if you're concerned that it's not being safeguarded properly, let us know, if for nothing else, so we can create an audit trail for you. So when and if we do get audited again, we can prove that we were following the requirements outlined by NIST 800-171. Then finally, reproduction and destruction. You're not allowed to duplicate any bannered CUI. Only I'm allowed to do that right now as FSO. Destruction, again, I would need to be able to destroy that or research IT, but I bring this in here because a lot of these federal contracts do have end dates. And I have a lot of PIs that are very reticent to give up their data sets because they may need them for future contracts. If your data sets are tied within a CUI labeled contract, then you need to have a record of destruction of those materials. For the most part, that's not the case with us. For the most part, we're talking about email, and we're talking about specific experiments or specific projects that we're managing individually in the enclave. So, but I do want people to understand that even though you're done with a project, your responsibilities with CUI haven't finished. We have to make sure that there's no longer any of it left on our systems. Next slide, please.
There's one question.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can I have a program manager send me CUI on my personal Gmail account?
No.
Or my normal CSU email account?
No, neither. In fact, Gmail makes me very angry as your facility security officer. You are breaking every contract in the world by using Gmail as opposed to CSU. We don't know where all the Gmail servers are. They're not just in the US. It is not safe. It's not secure. I don't care if it's more convenient. And I know a lot of people like to flow all their stuff through Gmail. If I had ran the railroad, we would not allow any contracts going to anybody using a Gmail account. So for the first part of your question, no Gmail, period. Second part of your question, if your program manager wants to email you bannered CUI, it needs to go through me. If your program manager wants to give you access to DoD Safe, which we will cover a little bit later in the presentation, DoD Safe is the Fed's basically VPN that they use for cleared contractors to share information. So your program manager would send you the credentials to a VPN. You would have to use dual authentication. I think it's Okta or another third-party identifier. And then you can communicate with your program manager in the DoD Safe secure environment. We can't establish that. That has to be established on the federal end. And your program manager, it's not the easiest thing in the world for them. So they're going to need to have a reason to do that. But I would also push back that I don't see the need for a lot of email communications that are officially CUI. If that is the case, we would want to find another secure communication piece. And I want to go back to the most important thing. This has to be bannered. It can't be your guy just says, hey, this is CUI and sends it to you. That's not CUI. It has to be classified. We have to know what type of CUI we're dealing with. It can't just be called that. So, and again, this requires pushback for all of us because the program managers aren't going to bend over backwards for us. They want us out of their hair. And this is a perfect example of someone saying, yep, this is CUI, treat it as such. No, tell me what classification of CUI it is and how you want us to handle it. And then we're more than happy to manage your CUI project.
Rich, are we seeing, because you and I talked before this presentation, and I told you some of my concerns that, like, when you go into like Nspires, it says that it's CUI automatically. Are we seeing sponsors who are just classifying everything CUI just to
Some, yes.
And how would you know? How would someone even have an idea that this really isn't CUI and it should be classified as such, or it should be?
If it's not bannered, it's not your responsibility. Okay. That's what I'm trying to, and I know that kind of is counterproductive, but I do not want our PIs, I don't want our scientists trying to figure out whether or not they have CUI. It's not their job. Now, and I will go into another piece as far as websites that do have CUI. I access about 6 different federal websites daily that are bannered CUI. I have my system registered with the feds so I can receive that information. If you are in the event where you need to go to a federal database that is bannered CUI, we would put physical controls into your office. And then again, you can't share it. You have to have everything blocked. And then we would let your program manager know these are the controls we're putting into place for bannered CUI. I can see some scenarios where if you had to log into a federal high performance computer, you might get bannered CUI on that. I would not be surprised at all if certain spatial data or geographical data, anything unfortunately labeled climate, they may just start labeling CUI, regardless of the type of project. Right now, though, remember FERPA and HIPAA, not CUI. Those are different designations. They follow different rules of safeguarding, and we'll get into that piece as well. Let's go to the next slide, please.
And just a comment in the, just a comment, and it was try not to say classified as CUI, and that was probably me. Lean more towards marked as CUI.
Very
So
good.
it's also changing our vernacular, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And so much of this is that. I'm as guilty as anybody. When I first started working with CUI, I did not see a difference between the control and the classification. That's where my error in approaching this for years was that I was approaching it from the data side as opposed to the control side. The data for me is now completely irrelevant. What I'm worried about are the controls in place to manage that data. And I only bring this up if you see CUI specified. This is the feds have two different designations, basic and specified. Almost always, this is going to have additional publication restrictions. That's really the big difference between the two of them. And when I say additional publications restrictions, I mean you're probably not going to be able to publish. So we don't have any of these right now on campus. I don't really see that we're the audience for CUI specified, because the nature of what we're doing with the feds is to publish. And so I see this more in the clear contractor community as opposed to CSU, but it is, it's important to realize that there are two different classifications of CUI as far as the feds are concerned. Okay, so again, this is to go back to your person on your phone telling you this is CUI. It's CUI if the government provides it to you or an authorized federal contractor provides it to you. Lockheed Martin can classify. CSU cannot classify. Ball Aerospace can classify. School of Mines, even though they're almost essentially an arm of the DOE, cannot. It has to come from an authorized contractor. That contractor has a TSSCI, and they have about 8 of me at that place making sure that everything is lined up properly. When I was talking to you about banner marking, so CUI on itself isn't a classification. CUI SPCTI is a classification. I know that I've got to handle that CUI as critical technical information. It's CRIT, I know it's infrastructure information. These are the markings that anytime I have physical CUI, for the handful of folks that I'm a courier for, I hand them the documentation. On the front top of that documentation is a page that says CUI, CUI SPCTI, who the program manager is, who the individual that can receive that is, and who the FSO is. And that person has to have that marking with them at all times with that document, and they have that document in a secure area. So that means that the program manager has properly classified it. We know in which appropriation the banner has been marked. Again, pretty much everything we're going to get is CTI or critical infrastructure. Again, the example for critical infrastructure would be our civil engineering department. Anybody that's working with bridges, anybody that's working with dams, anybody that has maps of bridges and dams, critical infrastructure information. It may be the most benign stuff in the world. Critical technical information can be, well, our drones are now going up an additional 500 feet, and they're not losing the ability to take the pictures that they wanted to from the original classification. Oh, okay, that's critical technical information. Those are two different classifications. If I don't have these classifications from the contractor, then we can't classify the information. So this is a perfect example of how we can't midstream label something. Either I missed it on the front end and it should have been labeled all along and I'm in violation, or the feds are trying to CYA and saying, hey, we should have done this in the first place. Let's jump in the middle. We can't do that. So without this information, I'm not allowed to classify the document. I'm glad this isn't lunch. Everybody's going to be falling asleep. So again, this is not CUI if it's not funded by the feds. So if you are working on private money, if you are working on foundation money, then you don't have to worry about CUI. You're one of the lucky ones. Medical information, human subjects information, all of Kathy Kosopoulos's group, that is not CUI. That is the health information, HIPAA information is a different classification. I don't touch that. FERPA is not CUI. We don't touch that. Anything that has currently been published, and when I say this, what I'm really thinking of are lab manuals, undergraduate capstone classes where the information is published and available on the web. This isn't as much going to a web page and looking up a formula or looking up what somebody's research is. This is research that we're doing here. But the expectation is that the results of the research is going to be something that subject matter experts already know. And that's why I referred to the capstone type environment, where we have our best scholars at the undergraduate level who are working on potentially controlled information, but the end result is going to be something that professors likely already know. So I don't worry about, I classify that as information already available. But what's really most important about this slide is HIPAA and FERPA. I say that A, because I don't have to worry about it, because I don't want to worry about it, and B, they're on separate systems. I cannot access FERPA information from my computer. I can't access HIPAA information from my network. It's a separate entity, it's a separate network. It's not in our control. So we're only dealing with stuff that comes from the feds. And we got to remember that. We are identifying the CUI lifecycle. We have right now a CUI incident response committee where we are trying to make this easiest for our university population to get through this process with talking to the fewest number of people. Obviously, identifying is the most important part. We need to know whether or not we have CUI present, and if so, moving on to safeguarding. Are we dealing with physical CUI? Can you let me manage it for you, and therefore you don't have to worry about electronic communications? Can you set up a DoD safe or another federal communication line that doesn't require sitting at resident on our systems? Do you need access to the University of California, San Diego enclave, which I'll discuss because you're working on a current project? Those are all of our safeguarding concerns. Sharing is important. I want you to be able to share this information with relevant partners and relevant subject matter experts. And this is where, again, my classification, when I first approached CUI, I approached this from a data classification level. And so I would have said, you can't share this. And now the way I'm reading the regulations and my different approaches, of course you can share this, only with appropriate people. And as the individual who is a subject matter expert, you're the one that gets to make that determination. And as I said earlier, the only real considerations beyond that would be if you're working on a DOE or DoD contract that originally had foreign national restrictions on the contract. Otherwise, you need to be able to share and collaborate to complete the work that you're doing. And then finally, removal. We want to make sure that we can remove this appropriately by the program manager. Especially if you're Department of Energy, they're going to want an attestation that we have removed it. If we are sending physical information to the enclave, which I'll discuss, we have to destroy those hard drives that we're using to transfer that information. So removal and destruction is one of the big pieces of this cycle that always falls at the end. And they saw it's the last 5% of every project, but it is very, very important. That non-removal can mean we can get dinged in an audit down the road if we have legacy CUI on our systems. Okay, so safeguarding, and now we're back in my wheelhouse. Pretty much everything that we're going to do for your project is actually going to be controlling your environment. And controlling your environment can seem very, very simple, but if you don't do it properly, you're not in compliance at any step of the process. So the first and foremost is you can't do this in a shared lab. You can't do this at your kitchen table. Your spouse and kids aren't supposed to be around while you're working on this information. They're not people that are part of your project. You cannot discuss this with folks who are not subject matter experts and not part of the project. When you're having your discussions, you have to reasonably assure somebody can't overhear you. If you're talking in the water cooler, and again, a graduate student from a country that we don't know where they're from walks through, that's a violation right there. If you are walking on campus talking to your professor and a group of people pass you, again, this sounds silly. This is how spies get stuff. They just sit around conferences and listen. You'd be shocked how much information I can gather. And this goes back to my ethical hacker stuff. Sitting in a corner, I can learn more about you in 20 minutes than you would imagine. And you're not used to people listening. You're not used to people approaching you in that fashion. We are all at an R1 institution. Everybody knows how much attraction is coming to these institutions, both from the feds and from the international community as a whole. It's very, very important that you restrict your conversations, that you restrict your information to those you feel need to know. When you receive CUI, I am trusting that you're going to keep that cover sheet on it, that you are going to lock it in your desk in a lockbox and then lock your front door, that you're going to pull the shades, that you're going to, if you need to, angle your monitor. You're going to do all of the physical steps that we outlined for you in the technology control plan, which I will cover, regardless of how silly they sound. And again, don't transmit it unless you know how to transmit it. If you have a question about forwarding, transmitting, disseminating, let us know. We'll be the ones to transmit that for you. And as I mentioned earlier, I can send and receive bannered CUI. So if you need me to send anything on your behalf, I know this sounds silly. This is how we're handling it now. I can do that for you. We're going to go through the 3 steps of the CUI process. Obviously, sponsored programs is going to be on the front end because they're going to be the ones that receive the contract. Sponsored programs will review and try to identify any potential CUI language. Once they identify CUI language, sponsored programs is going to notify Secure and Global Research, the second step in the process. Now, the nice thing about this for everybody in the call is you will not be dealing with me forever. We are currently in the process of hiring a full-time CUI position in Secure and Global Research that will be doing this for you next year. And I'm going to take the program, hand it off to them and say, good luck. I'm going to go back to exports. So we are going to have a full-time person in SGR whose sole responsibility is working both up with sponsored programs and then down with research IT if necessary to manage these contracts. Part of the confusion and part of the frustration, I know I'm a one-person department right now, and I'm not as timely. Everybody from sponsored programs on the call knows I'm behind on everything. This new role is going to help facilitate that. So we're going to have support that wasn't here before to help manage this program. So when I'm telling you what my Secure and Global Research's role is, keep in the back of your head, we're going to have help and you're not reliant upon just me, or because if I tell you this, everyone's going to start rolling their eyes. So, but we're notified by OSP, and then we're going to look at what OSP has brought to our attention as far as potential CUI. Then I'm going to determine whether or not the chair needs to be involved. That is a key that we haven't done in the past. I want department chairs to know what folks in their departments have CUI safeguard or have CUI needs. Part of this is that you might need to purchase something. Let's say as a PI, you need to buy encryption for your email because you're going to approach it for a different project, or maybe you need to buy a secure device. If the chair knows that we're breathing down your neck, making sure you have to follow these provisions, it may be easier for you to get the materials and equipment you need because it's not coming from you. It's not a frivolous request. It's coming from the compliance side saying you need to do this. We're going to make the determination if it has to be safeguarded or not. Not all CUI has to be safeguarded. Again, if you are just receiving documentation, you're the third person, you're the third investigator on a flow-through contract. They want you to review 40 pages of wavelength analysis and then say yes or no. There's not going to be any safeguarding beyond me printing it out, handing it to you, then you telling me to destroy it. And then that piece of the CUI is done. We may be a flow-through on the contract. There may be at the front end these provisions, either FAR or DFARS clauses. When it gets to us, we have one person reviewing one paper, and we manage it as such. even though we have to follow the controls outlined in the the FAR and DFARS clauses on the front end. We will then meet with the PI to mitigate risks, and we execute, my favorite word at CSU, the technology control plan. Let's go to that exciting slide, because this one, everyone can't wait for the technology control plan.
Well, before we go to that,
okay.
and which everyone's anticipating.
Yes.
There was a question about whether or not there's going to be typical language sometimes in the notice of funding opportunity that might indicate that there's CUI, or is it primarily going to come through as references in a DFAR or a FAR clause?
For the most part, I've seen them come through as clauses, because a reference to CUI still has to reference a clause or at least NIST 800-171. They cannot tell you this is CUI without giving me the dissemination controls. So the STCPI or the other different classifications have to come from the feds. They have to determine that this is how this is going to be handled. So in my experience, for the most part, it's always been these different clauses that are in the contracts. Will that stay consistent? It may not, it may very well not. You know, as you can imagine, everybody in our position is scrambling. There isn't a university out there that is a secured environment. No university knows how to manage CUI. In fact, I can think of at least 3 or 4 universities that are no longer accepting CUI because they don't want to take the risk. So they're no longer accepting any contracts, period, with these clauses in them, because their response to managing CUI was, it's more trouble than it's worth. They don't have the same federal portfolio that we do, so it's probably not as big a blow to them as it is to us. But I want to stress this to people on the call and to all of our PIs, especially when you hear from your colleagues saying, well, we don't have to worry about that. You do have to worry about that. It just means either your SGR isn't managing it, or you already have an enclave, or you have a zipper line, or you have access to secure communications that we don't have here.
I can anticipate that some of the reasons why this is asked, by the way, is that we have people probably who are helping in pre-award. And I
Right.
assume that some of this CUI and managing it on the backside could potentially cost money.
Yes. And
so if we can't
yes.
identify it at the proposal, and again, these might be rhetorical questions too that we can't answer right at this minute, and we don't know how to necessarily address this. But if it's going to cost us something during the project and we can't budget for those things, and in particular on contracts where we have very little leeway on a contract to change our budget.
Right.
Anyways, I'm kind of anticipating that could be something. Bill's putting in there that sometimes the NOFO will indicate that you will require proper control of CUI. But again, I'm assuming that our PIs and the people who are helping them with budgeting would really love to see, so that they can add a budget line item for doing this.
And you brought up a very important point, and this is, I'm going to say, it's a work in progress at this point, because and when I say it's a work in progress, we're actually discussing it. It's not something I put on a piece of paper and forgotten about. There's going to be costs associated with this that the PI is not going to be anticipating.
Right.
VPR doesn't have the money to help back fund that, where we might have 10 years ago. We might have had funds at VPR that could have done that. It is totally up to the PI right now. We don't know how quite to address that yet, because we will get into this when we get into the enclave. If you require secure enclave access, that cost has to come out of your project. We don't have any other funds for that. So I don't know how to answer that question beyond the fact, yes, this is going to cost our PI some more money. And no, I don't know necessarily where that money is going to come from.
I didn't anticipate you could answer it. I was just more anticipating the questions of, or what I would be asking if I was listening to that. So there's a clarifying bit. It says the award document would contain clauses regarding management of CUI. The technical narrative and proposal and possibly information provided by the sponsor to the PI would be the actual information that needs to be controlled. Is that accurate?
Could you say that again? All right, let me see it in the chat.
Yeah,
that does sound accurate.
And maybe the
Yes.
proposal itself might not have CUI in it, but what you're
Yes.
going to be delivering or what you're going to be doing as part of your work might be CUI.
Yes. And in fact, Chris, that was very good comment. Maybe Chris could take over now because I think she's got a better grasp of this than I do right now. So that's a very, very good point. What was the other chat piece that came in?
If the NOFO indicates that the award mechanism will be a federal contract as opposed to an assistance agreement, this is the first place to start and to probably prompt pre-award to ask the sponsor questions about if there will be CUI clauses. We take a proactive approach to state that we do not anticipate generating or receiving CUI and serves as a paper trail for the SRA at the award setup.
I really like that phrasing. Are these comments going to be available with the slides too afterwards? Because these comments are very valuable.
We have access to them.
Okay,
So
yeah, I would, both Chris and Tiffany's points are not only very accurate, they're better phrased than I had. So yes.
Yeah. And I have been reading them, so they will be part of the transcript of the of the video.
Great.
So okay.
I'll just throw out there real quick while we're talking about this proposal stage kind of discussion. If as a PI or as a department person helping a PI put a proposal together, if it looks like there might be CUI, especially as Tiffany indicated, if the opportunity you are applying for is a federal contract, reach out to Rich to discuss whether the work that you're going to be doing is potentially going to be CUI or not, so that we can get ahead of that. Should we include funds in the budget to cover using the secure enclave, for instance, and know more, hopefully accurately at proposal stage, whether to include that language that Tiffany has put in there about, hey, at proposal stage, we don't anticipate that we're going to be handling CUI, or vice versa. We do know we're going to be handling CUI, so it's in our budget to handle it, to be able to have the funds to handle it appropriately. Thanks. Sorry for jumping in.
Thank you, Bill. No, and Bill, please jump in. Anybody who knows more than me, please jump in.
Another comment, and again, we're going to get to your riveting next section. I know.
Everybody's sitting on the edge of their seat.
When we're a sub to a prime contractor on a project dealing with CUI, can our PI be covered by their CUI protection measures? So I assume the prime, would it still, would you still have to work with them here at CSU?
We would still have to work with them at CSU because the protections are for our digital protections that would be at the prime or the contractor site. We would still need to be able to prove that we could hit all those safeguards on our end. So a TCP would still be necessary.
Great. I would also ask that no document with CUI markings be put into KRPD.
Yes. No, nothing with CUI marking should be put anywhere, especially not in KR. Yes.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
Okay. So we're back in again, boy, we're an hour into this. Thank you, everybody, because I know this is confusing as heck, and I appreciate your patience. Technology control plans are a requirement for federal projects if you have a clearance. A technology control plan is a set of safeguards, individual safeguards for your lab that I'll go in and will assess physical controls, digital controls, access controls, and foreign national pieces to that. I'm going to, and this is where cost can come in. I may require that you change locks if you have shared locks and can't account for all the keys. If you don't have badged access to your building, we may need audit trails prior to putting the technology control plan in to look at access to that building to see how we can limit access to your lab. If you're in the powerhouse, let's say, where you don't have doors necessarily. You don't have labs to mark off. We put in signs, we put in banners, we can put in curtains. We need to show that we're doing our best effort to separate what you're working on from the rest of the university environment. So a technology control plan is signed by you, signed by me, signed by your dean, or pardon me, your chair, and depending on the project, the dean. So we're going to have everybody sign off, understanding that these are the controls required for your environment while you're working on this presentation. And this is going to be, I'm going to come in and make sure your door is closed. I'm going to sneak around your building and see if I can get in. I'm going to use all of my ethical hacking tools that I can find to try to get into your office, to get to your information so we can find where your vulnerabilities are. For the most part, if you have a locking cabinet or a lockbox and physical keys to your door that you can account for, you're okay. If you are part of the secure access control network, we would need to then talk to whoever manages access to those doors. We may need to take your lab or your office off the main grid, quote unquote. So only limited people have access to that. If you do need to send and receive, we would then put the secure enclave information into the technology control plan as well. I try to put in as many of these as I can. They are one more layer of protection for the PI. Sometimes they're not entirely necessary. I would much rather have a TCP in place that wasn't entirely necessary, obviously, than have an environment that wasn't properly controlled. So these come out of SGR. Even when we hire the new CUI coordinator, I'll be in charge as FSO of the technology control plans. What we do ask for you on this is that if there are changes to your lab through the life of the TCP, that would be personnel changes for the most part, that you notify us so we can keep your technology control plan up to date. This document is what I give the auditors when they come to you and say, how is Shannon managing CUI in her environment? This takes the, the risk away from the PI. It puts it squarely on me. So that's why you want these in place. Once I put a technology control plan in place, I'm now accepting the risk, not the PI. So it's in your best interest as the PI. And frankly, anybody in sponsored programs who wants to help their PIs say, listen, put this plan in place, then let Rich lose sleep, not you. Next slide, please.
Does anyone else have a vision of Rich as like the Pink Panther? Creeping along in their buildings? I don't know. That's the visual that I have.
I found at CSU with a clipboard and a CSU logo or a ladder, I haven't been stopped yet and anywhere I go wandering around.
And a ladder even.
Oh, a ladder gets you further than a clipboard anywhere at CSU. You can get into any area with a ladder.
Interesting. Again, I still have this vision of you as the Pink Panther just slinking around. Okay.
All right, next slide, please. Okay, so Research Information Technology is run by Executive Director Candace Ramsey. They are also a division of VPR. RIT is where I go to if we're managing what I call active CUI. If you're working on a project that requires you to deal, again, I'm dealing right now with large data sets at Semmel. So they are running a program called ArcGIS, which from what I can understand is a geopositioning software that they are using with the projects for the federal government. That's not something that we can have on our systems. I cannot have ArcGIS running on a CSU network with controlled unclassified information. So what we've done is Research IT has an agreement with the University of California, San Diego for their secure enclave. The University of UCSD's enclave is CMMC compliant, DoD and DoD safe compliant. So all of their controls will apply to us when we're in their enclave. So this is an example of where we can rely on UCSD's controls to manage our CUI on our end. This is something that we will determine, and Research IT will determine whether or not you need to go into the project. Now, there are a handful of keys to this. First of all, anybody in the enclave needs CUI and federal contract information training. There's two different sets of training that you need to complete annually in order to access the enclave and use this data. I'm going to run additional background checks every 3 years on everybody who goes into the enclave. So this is an addition to your background check, pardon me, that you already had when you came to CSU. Anybody you add to this project has to be vetted through CSU, through my department before being added to the project. And here's the key. There's a cost to this, and that cost floats depending on how many people are currently in the enclave. This part is floating. And so, and I don't have the costs up on my end. This is one of the few times where I can dump it off on somebody else and say RIT manages access to the enclave and manages the cost for the enclave. But this is money that we have to put out on the front end. And we don't know where that money is going to come from. I don't have it. Obviously the PI is not building that into their contract or into their proposal when they're asking for money for a contract. So this is this is the areas right now we're trying to figure out. We're trying to figure out how are we going to manage this. In the future, we're not going to be reliant upon UCSD. CSU will have a solution on-prem that will allow us to manage CUI. Obviously, there's two ways of approaching this. One would be building a physical building, running a zipper line, a secure line to that, separate from CSU's network, and making everybody who wants to use CUI go to this building. That's what the University of Michigan has. That's what Georgia Tech has. A lot of the folks, really heavily defense-oriented universities, already have these sites on-prem. We're not going to be building any buildings anytime soon. So as much as I'd love to build an enclave, we're going to have to do this through software, which would mean that we're going to have to upgrade our Office 365 client to GCC level high. That's money. We haven't figured out where that money is coming from. And we haven't figured out how many people need to pay for this. If we do this campus-wide, how am I going to justify to sociology that suddenly their office license is $30 more a year per person if they don't have any need for controlled access? So these are the questions that are floating in our head. Right now, UCSD is keeping us compliant. It means that when we get audited again, we can say we are CMMC 2 level compliant and CUI active compliant. However, it's not going to be here forever. We're not going to do this forever because the cost is going to get prohibitive. And it's right now, we have working through SEML. They're all on cooperative agreements. These are a little bit larger money contracts. I'm not saying SEML, isn't feeling the pain, but these aren't small $200,000, $500,000 contracts that you suddenly have to add 15% operating costs on. But for a smaller proposal, the UCSD's cost could be detrimental. So we're throwing that out there. I say that because it's not my problem because I don't have to worry about the cost for this, but this is an issue because we don't know how to build this cost in to a potential proposal yet. So, okay, next slide. Now that I've given everybody the bad news. Okay, so again, we're only going to UCSD if it's active. This is not for receiving CUI. This is not for email correspondence. This is if your project requires that means your data sets you're working on are currently labeled CUI. However that may pan out, that's when we go to the enclave. It has to require advanced security. And again, to your program managers, it is CMMC level 2 and CUI compliant. CSU is at CMMC level 1 right now. We anticipate to be at CMMC level 2 by the end of the summer. CMMC is the cyber model maturity certification that all federal contractors have to meet their standards for digital safeguarding. It's very, very similar to CUI, but they're not the same. But again, these are both safeguarding restrictions for digital access. And there are probably plenty of other techies on the call that understand this more than I do. But basically, the point of UCSD is to tell our project managers, listen, we have the ability to manage active CUI. If they ask you if we're CMMC compliant, you can say yes. But then our PIs have to say, well, how the hell am I going to pay for this? So it's not a perfect solution by any stretch, but that is how we're currently working now. It starts with sponsored programs. They determine whether or not their safeguarding is necessary. They come to Secure and Global Research. We look at the safeguarding requirements, determine if we can manage that safeguarding on our own, or if necessary, go to Research IT, where we can do active safeguarding on an active project. So the do's. You're very vulnerable when you're hosting meetings and conferences. You're very vulnerable when you invite people to campus, especially foreign nationals, and don't tell me, and then have meetings and conferences. You need to always have a need to know in the back of your head when you are discussing controlled unclassified information. If you have the ability to use DoD Safe, use it. Ask your program manager if you can. It's not a cost to them, it's just an extra step for them. And what it does is it sends you a link to a VPN where you can, you'll get a separate email with a password in it, where you can safely access the DoD Safe VPN. You can communicate, you can read files. There's no transfer out of DoD Safe, but it is an ability for you to communicate with your program manager securely. I've had at least 3 instances over the past 4 months where DoD Safe was enough where we didn't have to worry about advanced safeguarding, because there were 2 or 3 times where the PM needed a one-on-one. Teams does not work. So remember, you can't do that on Teams. You have to do it through a secure line, Signal notwithstanding. You need to contact me anytime you need to receive CUI documentation if safe is not an option. And if you see somebody breaking the rules, again, you see something, say something, you have to go to Secure and Global Research and Signal for CUI. So I had a 2-hour, I had to get my recertified for data classification models from the DCSA, Defense Counterintelligence Security Agency. And in my presentation, they went over all of the different third-party things you cannot use as a federal contractor. And of course, Signal was at the top. So yes, please don't use Signal for CUI. Okay, so the don'ts are easier. You can't use email to send or receive it. More importantly, you can't use any messaging for CUI, whether they say it's secure or not. If we move to GCC level high at CSU, from what I understand, and I would defer to Department of IT and Research IT, but what I understand, Teams is part of that package. So we would have secure email communications, and we would have secure file transfer access and storage through Teams. But I don't know that for sure. That's up to the IT folks. But as of now, Teams is not secure. And in fact, I don't even allow people now to use Teams when they're in China back to the US, because there are still too many issues with data interception between the Chinese mainland and the US. You can't remove markings or classification. All of these sessions that I give, there's always, the feds always say, this could lead to jail time. This could lead to, you might get fined, you might get busted. And everybody knows nobody's going to jail for mishandling CUI documentation. If you remove marking or classification, that is one of those times where you could get busted. It hasn't happened here. I don't anticipate anybody ever would. But if you do, you're breaking federal law. And you get the wrong FBI agent, you get the wrong auditor from the DoD, they could go after you, if nothing else, to try to prevent your career from moving forward or fine you. But that is one area where people do get into trouble. This happens all the time, again, because you are in an environment with your subject matter experts. You're not used to looking around to see who's listening to you. As your ex-ethical hacker, I got more information from sitting and listening than I did from any other method of data gathering. People tell you more in passing on the way to the bathroom, blah, 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 than you would imagine. So always be sure that if you have CUI, you're only discussing it with people with a need to know in an area where other people can't hear it. Oh boy, okay, we're getting there. Next slide, please. So this is a national security concern. This is why this is all coming into play. I had a presentation earlier and I thought I came up with a good way of phrasing this. The feds, we may be doing altruistic stuff at CSU. We may be solving diseases. We may be helping with climate change. We may be doing all this great stuff. The feds don't care. The feds are promoting national security. That's why they are giving us federal dollars. They want us to protect the US. They want us to come up with the innovation. They want us to be the subject matter experts in everything. but they're doing this because of from a national security concern, not from an altruistic concern. So we have to always have this in the back of our head. Department of Defense funding is limited to universities. It's kind of silly to think that, but we really have to prove that we are good stewards of that federal funding. And so always in the back of your head, remember, these are all the course of national security initiatives. We will work with the contractor. And when I say we, I'm anticipating the new person coming into SGR who's going to manage this CUI program is going to get to know a lot of program managers. And our approach is going to be pushback, pushback, pushback as much as we possibly can while we can still move the project forward. I've talked with Bill about this. I've talked with some other folks from sponsored programs. We know program managers are dumping some of this stuff in contracts because they don't want to run the risk of it being CUI. They don't know either. But again, if you're going to Lockheed, what's the point? It doesn't matter if you put the 712 provision in there, you're already in a cleared environment. So a lot of this stuff is boilerplate. A lot of this is simply cut and paste where they don't realize, oh, a university can't manage safeguarding at the same level that a cleared contractor can. Work with us. Do not think that it's not going to affect you. Do not think that your project is too small to attract attention. In our last audit, they went through every single contract from the DoD, and they talked to, I think, 60% of our PIs who received DoD funding. They will find you, and so talk to us first before you get in a position where you might not know what type of information you're handling. And finally, going into that, markings are the most important thing. Don't assume you have it. Someone can't tell you you have it. You have to see that you have it. It either needs to be bannered, it needs to be marked, it needs to have a provision in there. At no point can a program manager just tell you over the phone, and I brought this up earlier, this just happened. It was told to somebody midway, oh, by the way, you're dealing with CUI. No, you're not. You simply aren't. It can only designate with federal partners. And I actually need to change this, federal partners or cleared defense contractors. So we could receive a document from Lockheed Martin that had original classification on it because they are a federal prime contractor. So if you're one of those folks, if you're khaki, if you're Numerica in town here, they can do their original classification. We can't, and we never will be able to. So it's only going to come to us already marked if we're receiving that information. Okay. Oh, good. So I don't know that I left a ton of time for questions. What I also do want to stress is for everybody on the call that's dealt with me on this, it's been slow, it's been very clunky, and you've got a lot of mixed information at times. We now have, with this new CUI governance committee and with a new hiring that we're going to be doing in our areas, and a much clearer distinction between SGR's role, sponsored programs role, and research IT's role, I think we're going to be able to streamline this in a fashion that next year it's not going to be creating as many headaches. I also wanted to demystify this. This isn't as dire as maybe we have made it out to be in the past. This is simply a control. We just need to make sure we're managing the data properly, we're handling the data properly, and it's only being viewed by people with the need to know. Otherwise, again, this isn't classified. This isn't secret level, so doesn't need that level of safeguarding. And finally, if it's not marked, it's not CUI as far as you're concerned. As far as me or sponsor programs, if we need to go back in and look at, say, a clause in there, we can make a determination. But at no point in the project are you going to be told, oh, by the way, you now have CUI. So with that, okay, I could give you some minutes left. I want to tell everybody to reach out to me directly with specific questions about contracts, especially if they have specific questions about clauses. And otherwise, I appreciate all of your patience with me and my department and with all of us with this. We've given you conflicting information and haven't made your jobs very easy. I owe Bill at least 20 beers. So thank you all very much. And please let me know how else I can help you with this process.